So here we are, your
So
average RX Radio episode intro.
Yeah.
Not really knowing what we're going to talk about, but yeah, thanks for being here. We have Matt Penney on the episode.
Hello, friends.
I know. We dove into strength training and hypertrophy training.
Yeah.
Is what we talked about. Special considerations if you're, how tall are you, Matt?
6'3".
6'3".
Yeah, but he's not a 6'3" though. He's like a
6'3.75", maybe.
Oh no, I was gonna say like you just seem like your leg length is longer than 6'.
The wingspan of a pterodactyl.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like a spider.
Yeah, it's a lot of limb.
It's a lot of limb.
I'm a very limby person.
Absolutely true.
I'm all knees and elbows.
Yeah. So we talked about how to train if you're that.
And just I think the big one, or the consideration that we brought up, was how hypertrophy training within phases around strength training can be so important. Whereas in the past we've spoken about strength training in relation to hypertrophy training, because I think that is a vital part of hypertrophy training, is making sure that you have a base level or foundation of strength. Mm-hmm. But when does the flip side or the reverse of it actually become so important? And I think there was a cool conversation, a cool discussion kind of go down. Along with Penny's
analytical brain,
disability, but I don't think that's what we can call it.
Disability.
Let's go with that.
Special circumstances, to say the least.
It's just the word I would use from that side. Yeah, so it's a cool conversation, good topics.
Yeah, actionable takeaways. There's some things that you guys can use in there for yourselves and your clients.
Yeah, especially coming into the new year. I think we spoke about that as well. New year. Courses.
New me.
New
yeah. I think it's fitting, though. I think it's fitting. January 1, everyone's starting their diets, trying to trim off the fat of all the shit that they ate over the holidays. Yeah. But we have body composition with Dr. Dwayne Jackson coming up, nutrition course. It's a 14-week, I think, is what we have it slated for, but it'll probably be a couple additional weeks on top of that. Yeah. Dwayne is one of the, aside from Matt, in a different way, Dwayne is one of the smartest humans I think I've ever talked to, especially when it comes to nutrition. Yeah. He has a ton of experience lecturing in an academic setting, so you can get a really professionally done course, a lot of top-tier relevant information. He does the research before every go of the course to make sure that everything is up to date and it's relevant with the best information, the best research that you guys can get. So I can't recommend this course enough. Can't recommend Dwayne enough. That's going to go end of January. Yep. We'll have that. We'll have a webinar launching beginning of January with Dwayne. If you guys want to kind of get to know him and get to know how he lectures and get a taste of some of the course material.
His style of teaching is unique.
Absolutely, yeah.
From someone who is so intellectual and can take topics that I've never thought about in my entire life and dumb it down to my level, which is not very high, and just give you the ability to grasp the concept and then actually slowly nurture yourself and nurture you back up to the more complex variations of it, if you were. He's just a gun, to be honest. That's all he is. Like he's one of the crew. He walks the walk as well. Like he's pretty yoked for having one kidney.
He's walked the walk his whole life.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Walked the walk. So great course to do. Fitting coming into the new year, especially if it's something you as a coach want to brush up on and kind of get better techniques, better optimization around body composition. It's the course for you for the year. It's one of those that I would earmark as like a base foundation for the year to get done. You get your nutrition right with your clients and you're going to see massive results on top of knowing how to train with them and kind of put them in the right space from that side. So definitely a course that I would be looking at attending and getting under my belt if it's one you haven't done.
Well, and that's the thing with it, that it's such an investment in yourself to be able to take this course that is really one of those that can completely change how you approach, completely change your business and the service that you're able to provide to your students or to your clients, and really give you a lot more structure, a lot more context to get the best results possible, so you can put that back to your clients, so you can directly take that information and start applying it. And it comes at a perfect time of the new year where you can bring that excitement, that energy, that focus that people have, and really be able to capitalize week to week, incorporating the information from the lecture and begin to expand and build out with the different contexts that you'll get in the 14 weeks.
Absolutely. Yeah. So definitely check that out with Dr. Dwayne. Super smart guy. You guys will take a lot out of that course. Aside from that, shout out to the sponsors. We have Vivo Barefoot. Check out vivobarefoot.com/RXRadio. Code RXRadio20 for 20% off your Vivo order. We have HD Muscle. Code RXD.
10% off.
10% off. You guys can combine that with any other sales or any promotions they have going on their website. And that's it.
Pretty much it.
Enjoy.
You're tuned in to RX Radio.
First off, we're here.
Yeah.
We're all here.
Yeah.
Just take a look at this frame. It makes me so happy. James McIntosh.
That's the best profile photo. Like the
yeah. I want this on my page as my profile.
Yeah.
James McIntosh.
Yes.
James Thayer. Matt Penney. This is his first introduction to the podcast. Matt is our CTO here at Prescript. He basically does everything that no one else knows how to do.
Which is a lot.
But, like, no one else wants to do, too.
But they don't, no, the thing is, like, I want to do the things that you can do because I see how many things you do, and I want to help you, but I literally am unable to do that because I don't even know what you do.
We'll just end up actually making it worse for him.
Yeah, exactly. I'll fuck something up, and he'll have to do more work.
Yeah, exactly. So we just kind of let him do what he needs to do, tell us that we're being fucking idiots.
Yeah.
And we'll stick to the, like, lifting weights and telling people, and he'll tell us what to do, and he'll lift weights better than us as well.
Exactly. That's the thing.
I don't know about that one.
Well,
that's a tall order,
I
my
watched you do a hack squat today, and I realized that having short limbs is a blessing.
The thing about Matt is RPE 11.
Yes. That's what I watched.
All the time. I've never seen him train where it didn't look like he was trying to kill himself.
That's literally it. I sat there and I was just like, all right, if I trained like that, I'd probably be 3 times the size of me or dead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a necessity, man. Like, everything, the ranges are so much longer. Like, I talk as if I've been, like, short, and I know what it's like. It's like, this time around, I gained an extra.
Yeah, you were what? My height at what, 10, somewhere like that.
Oh yeah, like it was in 9th grade. I was 6'3", and it was like
shit.
It was really weird.
I think I was like maybe 5'3".
What is that?
In the 9th grade, maybe.
I'm still not at 6 foot, and I'll never get there, so we're good.
Yeah, same.
I don't advise it, man. Everyone always wants to be tall. You don't want to be tall. Everything's harder. Like, if you've seen me getting in and out of the car, it's a Land Rover, for fuck's sakes. A Land Rover, and I'm laboring to get in this thing.
Knees up to your chest.
You've got nothing to write home about. You broke your patella trying to get out of the Land Rover.
I know. It's not easy. It's not an easy car to get in and out of at any height.
For us, it's actually a fall up the car. Like, it's that high off the fucking road that we fall out, and it's actually like jumping off a good half a story. So I don't know. I feel like the height advantage may work in your favor that time for once.
You should see the car I have at home. I just have like a dinky Chevy Cobalt, like a 2009 Cobalt.
Don't know what that
and
is.
it's like, this thing is like, I'm kind of like packed into this thing like I'm in a sausage casing. Yeah. Right? Like, it's the door closes and everything is right up in you, right? It's just like you got just you're all elbows and knees. You're all elbows and knees.
He has an imprint on his headliner from his head.
Yeah, when I was a kid, my dad had this Hyundai Pony. I remember it was like a real piece of shit, right? But I mean, like, that's, cars back then were all real pieces of shit. But I remember this, that he's about my height. And he's got, in his car, he had 2 things that were busted in it. The seat, he had to put a pillow underneath it because, like, the seat was just, like, fucking destroyed from sitting in it forever. And the head had, like, the fabric was cut out. And then to the second level, there was, like, this foam stuff that was also out. Like, just from friction over time.
So your dad wore the car.
Yeah, he wore the car down to bare metal.
It's a hat with wheels at that point. Yeah, your dad's a large man.
It's the Flintstones, just in a modern version as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Fuck, no. All right, well, I suppose at a height disadvantage, you're going to fall into the category of hypertrophy and strength in a very different realm. I would say all the considerations are going to be, like, vastly different, in my opinion. We have to take into account a very different set of variables that we should be looking at if we want to grow you. I think we're at a disadvantage. We press like this, and I've full ranged as much as I need to with my T-Rex arms. Like, you've got the wingspan of a Boeing going on, and it's like it changes a lot of variables when we start looking at like program design and looking at specifically, the topic we wanted to kind of talk about is how does hypertrophy benefit us for strength, and vice versa, strength for hypertrophy. But I think in your case, hypertrophy is going to be your biggest ally because
without a doubt, man. Like it's the part that throughout my training career, I kind of like put the pieces together of how much of a disadvantage height is, and I'm pretty sure everybody is going to think that I'm like a total pain in the dick for like complaining about it. It's just like at the end of the day, regardless of what I'm saying here, just lift the damn weights. Right. Beautiful. But before we lift the damn weights, it's helpful to think of a few realities, right? And I don't want to like bang the physics drum here, but it is kind of the reason why it's so damn hard. But to give an example of like what kind of disadvantages I think of when I'm programming on this. So today I did a bunch of back squats, and I don't like to do a bunch of back squats. The bar is sitting on my back about 6 feet off the ground. That is a massive distance to cover, and when you deviate by 1 or 2 degrees, the amount of deviation that you get at the level of the bar is much greater distance-wise than someone who's shorter, right? So naturally speaking, so the forces are greater, the leverages are greater, everything's harder to work through. But the problem is I don't have a hack squat machine at home, so I kind of want to be at least decent enough at this to drive a hypertrophic outcome, right? And also like health considerations, being able to be capable of moving around when I'm old is also nice, right? But yeah, like you said, hypertrophy is kind of king, right? And I kind of get to the point where with barbell stuff, when I'm limited to using barbell stuff, it really lends more into that aspect of like, I understand that this isn't necessarily like the optimal medium for hypertrophy, but it's kind of like a necessary medium in the sense that there are so many other training considerations to kick off of. I don't have all day to spend in the gym, that I have to kind of like play within the constructs of things that sort of resemble like traditional hypertrophy training, like lighter loads, higher volume, right?
Yeah, from that side. You've kind of got to play like the Rubik's Cube of hypertrophy in this and try and line up the different colors as best as we can with what we have is kind of how I would look at it. It's probably a shitty analogy, but that's how I would work it in my head with colors.
Yeah,
it makes no sense, but that's how I do it. Like I see, we don't have access to being able to turn whatever to the right, so I have to turn to the left for you. It's like I literally can, I do this when I think about what I'm going to be doing for your training. It's like you don't have access to a machine. Okay, cool. You're going to have to learn how to squat on a barbell, but a barbell is a pretty good medium for hypertrophy. I hate to use it in Olympia, but Ronnie Coleman was a pretty big man.
Yeah, and it is at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
The old try hard method will get you pretty far.
It's funny that I feel like a lot of people have forgotten that fucking method.
Well, the thing is that when do you ever see someone that's actually strong that's small? Right?
Yeah.
It just
never.
Well, I mean, they're either small or if they're my height, they're like 350 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's true. But they're not smart. I don't know anyone, no offense, I don't know anyone your height, 350 pounds, and who has a brain. Very limited amount.
When you're built like that, you kind of like shoehorn yourself, into a few professions, right?
Yeah, strong man.
Yeah.
That's it.
Basketball. Now, when you're training on the barbell for hypertrophy, since you have such a greater range of motion, is volume a consideration for you? Because that's something in strength training for weightlifters, larger males, that's something I consider in their accumulated volume, right? Is that one rep is going to be more time under tension than, say, a 5 to 110 pound
because
female.
Their distance that they're
because
moving
the distance
is
that they're traveling, is much greater. So does that influence, in terms of volume or loading that you use to try and get the outcomes you're trying to chase?
Absolutely, 150%. Yeah. The simple fact of the matter is that any barbell movement really for me that's sort of lower body dominant is going to be really, really fatiguing.
Right.
I mean, the height thing is obviously the drum I'm going to fucking bang all day long. But I mean, if you break it down into its mechanical components, a greater range of motion is basically more force times distance, right? So you're doing more work and then more work is obviously harder to do, greater energy requirements and so on, right? And I also don't want to die, so eating about 6,000 calories a day at the moment is not a thing that I want to really engage in.
That's incredible to see, by the way.
Oh, dude, it's so gross.
6,000 calories of oatmeal and egg whites.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, but like to get back to the topic on hand, like I have to walk a fine line on it, especially like right now in my programming. I had just moved to training at home. And I was training before in a gym that had quite a bit of machinery in it, right? So it's a very big paradigm shift. Unfortunately, right now, the priority is kind of you have to get good at moving with free weights again before we can really start to use this to build muscle, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure that I'm getting like some positive hypertrophic effect from doing all this stuff, and everything is always being worked to a high intensity.
Yeah, well, you're getting no negatives, let's be honest. It's like your strength training, you're eating an adequate protein, you're making sure that you get your calories in. Like, you can't be going backwards.
Yeah. Well, that's the hope, right? Like, the most that's what we're doing it here
it's
for.
Just like, shit.
Yeah, so the programming right now with barbell stuff tends to be like I still like to kind of get up into like 1 or 2 RIR as much as I can. Like I don't like to come in and like sit at I mean I prefer RIR, but RP it's all the same shit. I prefer sitting at RP like 7 or 8 for a first set on something on a barbell, right? But I would expect that number to kind of go up progressively as it goes along. So it's kind of a mental game too, in that I don't feel like I've trained unless I've worked hard.
Right. Yeah.
And that it's a scratch that I kind of have to itch, which I liked scratching on a hack squat. But I mean, this is the situation that we've dealt with, right? So, understanding what the constraints are, being sort of aware enough to understand what is actually a 3 RIR load or 2 RIR load is going to take some calibration to figure out. But it's just I would rather be in a position where I'm working hard within the constraints that I presented than artificially working to some sort of like lower volume benchmark, because I think that's what I need to be better down the road. It's like, why can't I just do both? Right? Presuming that I can move with the same quality through every rep, yada, yada, yada. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're training basically to technical fatigue earlier on so that you can allow yourself that runway to progress down. So that later on it can be actual muscular fatigue.
Or
closer
exactly.
to.
Yeah. Like, it's the continuum, right? So every week I'm trying to sort of like push our marker down the continuum of where we are to get closer and closer to reaching that sort of muscle fatigue situation on the free weights. But the other consideration that comes out of all of this too is, I mean, the barbell is that ends up being my A1, right? And a necessity. So there's still a whole other workout to program for.
Yeah.
And this is where I found being clever at home really had its advantages. Like having a landmine opens up about 1 billion ways of having stabilized media.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
Yeah, so I've like personally for me, in order to avoid having my leg training completely beat me into a bloody pulp, I have to make sure that everything that I do after my A1, unless I'm directly going after a stability type adaptation, like something like actual single leg RDL with a dumbbell or some loading like that, then it's got to be stabilized just to manage the sympathetic fatigue that comes out of it. It's like the stabilization effort from moving from a very high up position where the bar is in a super unstable position to a very low position where I'm in my most unstable possible position is going to be a lot of work when you have to move, how many ever feet that is, right?
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately a fact of reality. I have to live with that, and it's going to fatigue me. And I'm 35, and I can't recover like I used to.
Right.
So the big thing for me, like I immediately go to considerations of using, intensifies is the wrong word, but using ways to increase time and attention with minimal load. So like 1 1/4 reps, or like slowing down concentric or eccentric tempos. Like that's where these tools become so effective for someone like you. Again, take into consideration finding ways of externally stable or increased externally stabilized mediums, from that being a barbell to a landmine variation of some form of something that we can kind of do, and then mitigate load, because your load, I don't want to say load is higher, but your intensity is higher because of force, distance, velocity. Like that's all.
Yeah.
That is actually higher than if me and you did the same weight at the same body, like same weight, same reps.
It's work, like you were saying
Correct.
before.
It's
force
very
times
different.
distance
Correct.
over time.
So it's very different work there. It's like I have to deload you essentially, or bring down load in a medium or a programmed way that still creates hypertrophy, but is then greater externally stabilized than that of just the barbell, and to then allow you to progress down the way. Like, it opens up, it's actually fucking cool because it opens up problem solving to like the next degree.
Yeah, and
it's fun.
It is fun, actually. Like, and I kind of like deride myself for thinking that way.
No, it is.
Because I'm sure my wife could testify to this. The amount of time that I spend assembling clutches in the garage to do like stabilized stuff, and like I hit like a good variation, maybe about 30% of the time. Like 7 out of 10 of my clutches are complete garbage. But I mean, it's exactly what you mentioned in that using those intensifiers is the way that I do have to get a lot of intensity when it comes to compound volume like that, right?
Great.
Like strict, difficult to stabilize volume. And one key consideration that always comes into play with the barbell stuff is understanding just how taxing the stability effort is.
Absolutely.
I feel like that gets lost a lot in conversation. And I mean, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But if anyone's doubting you, like, just tell them to hold a plank. It's like, yeah, if you can hold a plank for a couple of minutes, probably going to start shaking pretty good, and you start feeling that fatigue, right? Now, just imagine with, you know, how many hundreds of pounds that are sitting on your back, gravity pulling that down, and you being in a horribly unstable position. So those considerations put into play is like once we get past A1, like we might not want to touch any other unstabilized media, or maybe like if we do, we want to keep variations fairly light, right?
Yeah.
We have to make sure that we program accordingly for that, because load is the glass ceiling, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, right? So, but like you were mentioning, there's many great ways to really crank up the intensity with the intraset intensifiers, supersets, drop sets, rest pauses. I do a lot of drop sets and rest pauses personally.
How do you equate for that?
It depends. So sometimes I'll kind of implement them as an audible if I'm sort of having a day where I'm having difficulty accumulating the volume that I'm looking for. So I'll do just add like a 30-second rest pause after my last set, rest for 30 seconds, get in and just crank out a few more reps just to make sure that I'm driving an equivalent amount of like net overall fatigue adjusted for quality on the day.
What's the red-green? What's the red-green that you pick on that day? It's like, okay, this is going to be an intensifier. This is not. Like, what metrics? What do you judge to do that?
Typically, it has to do with movement quality, stabilization, and effectively, it's going to come down to the one core criteria is how well am I going to be able to move this load?
Yeah.
And the answer to that question is what dictates what sort of programming will follow, and what sort of programming will follow dictates what sort of intensifiers need to be added. The other big factor that I consider whenever I'm adding an intensifier is whether or not this movement is already progressing at like a good rate.
Right. Yeah.
If it's progressing at a good rate, usually for me, I find 4 reps to tend to be a pretty good rate per week to progress something. I find that when my stuff is going really well, I get somewhere between 4 and 6 reps as an overload. So if I'm seeing benchmarks around somewhere between 3 and 6 reps extra, I probably won't bother going with like an intensifier since it seems to be responding well enough to the stimulus I've already applied to it.
Yeah, and I guess that rep range is dictative of, these MacGyvered variations of exercises that you've decided to kind of come up with from that side. Because, I mean, if we have to take this to a more applicable, not that yours isn't, but more applicable realm, it's like, if I saw 4 reps of progression in my program, it's like I've either upped the dose dramatically or I really fucked some movement quality things up. Like, that's the difference from that side. So it's because we're talking in your realm, in your medium, and like those lesser loads that we've kind of moved from that side. I don't think it's like your sport. If you saw a 4 rep increase, like that would be like
yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
The Russian cupboard got opened and you got a little pill. That's
exactly.
That's what
I'm assuming that in that scenario though, you're talking about the load is equated for. The load is the standard there.
Yeah.
And you're trying to progress reps week over week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that could be a lot of things, especially earlier on. That could be just greater coordination of the skill.
Yeah.
And then later on, it could be actually expressed as, a greater ability to squat, is maybe a greater capacity, more metabolic, or if it is, you have more muscle tissue so you can actually move the weight for more reps. But yeah, if we're talking about something that's more strength oriented, 4 reps is going to be a lot.
It's impressive.
That's going to be a lot. I just want them to hold on.
Yeah.
Not move backwards as the load increases when we're talking strength.
Well, something that you mentioned earlier, you kind of talked about awareness, and watching you in the gym today, like with your height, you have to understand how a machine works to be able to manipulate it. Like that's a big difference in watching you today and me being put on machines. I go mindless and just move weight, but you actually have to understand how your body's moving in on that to be able to manipulate your body around the machine. Like you can't just jump in and go. You actually have to put some thought to it. And with that, I think there's a translation going to the barbell of understanding how your body moves through space and time. And so looking at like trying to equate for those jumps or those rep ranges, like to me, that awareness comes back to movement efficiency. It's like that's your progress is literally the movement efficiency that you're having a neurological adaptation and understanding how you can move through that space and time better. And the other aspect of it that I like that you were talking about in context of a home gym, with the landmine, I think it's underutilized in a lot of home gyms, but it's an olive branch to the barbell to a machine setup because like the problem with dumbbells, you have to have a lot of them to give you the variety. With a landmine, it's literally the exact same equipment as a barbell. It's just that it has that stabilizing quality, but you're using the same weights, the same plates to put on it. It's just how you manipulate your body around it. And with that, it again brings awareness and that self-efficiency to be able to move that now you're working or pivoting around a point. Whereas on a machine, it's dictating the position that you're allowed to be in and you kind of augment your body around it. Whereas the barbell, it's the weight is going to dictate if it's shifting and you're kind of like counteracting that. Whereas with the landmine and a lot of exercises that you can put with that, it's that happy medium of here's this fixed point, but you have freedom in this area to move around. Mm-hmm. It's one aspect that I'll use the single leg landmine for RDLs, but use a Zercher hold because some of those qualities is like manipulating into it, that lean in, the pronation into your foot that you won't find a lot of times. Like it's aspects like that you can find some weird positions that you can't get out of machines and you don't want out of barbells. So I think that's really unique, and we talked about it a little bit. Like nobody wants to do lateral lunges for hypertrophy because that's terrible. Like an adductor machine is the way to go for that. But just having that awareness, I think, allows a lot of opportunity for you to, in translation of how you're going to set those reps, how you're progressing because you have that. And I think a lot of people lose that in the translation of trying to go from machines to barbells or vice versa. There's not that understanding where it might have been forced for you because machines aren't built for you.
No, not at all. I mean, training for hypertrophy is an extremely simple endeavor. And I don't mean to like sort of downplay everything that we do, considering, the fact that we base everything that we do based on these concepts of training muscles. However, like if you were to boil it down to one statement, it would be your ability to apply effort through a medium that is fixed in such a way that the bones, let me phrase it a different way. It's your way to be able to stabilize the bones that are sitting around a particular joint such that you can articulate that joint without any of those bones moving unless they have to as a part of the movement.
Yeah.
Right? So the question is, how much stress are you putting on the muscle that you're trying to train? Ultimately, that's just putting it in a different way.
How much tension can we create is essentially what we want to, that's the goal.
Yeah. It's like, this isn't like a globally applicable thing, but maybe more applicable for isolation context is how good are you at holding still? Right?
Yeah, that's external stability.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the inverse with the back squat example, is that the first thing that's going to give out is going to be your internal stability. Yeah. Right? That's the difference between that and like a leg press or a hack squat, is that 10 out of 10 times, if you fail, it's going to be your core failing or your pelvic position, whatever that might be. So that's always going to limit you in how you can create and express force through the lower body musculature.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I like to sort of like apply that concept even in a less stabilized compound context, like a back squat, where I'm thinking more like, okay, how good am I at holding still? So what needs to hold still here? Well, my rib cage and my pelvis should ideally be in a place where these things are aligned, right? That sounds like something that's holding still.
Right.
So today, for instance, the big focus of the day was how good are we at holding this still? Because the better we are at holding this still, the more work we can do in the legs.
Yeah.
Right. And the more work we can do in the legs, the more potential we have to grow.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a really good outlook to have, because I think a lot of time, in my world at least, in strength training, people chase the number on the bar, and they don't even have intention around any of that stuff. So even taking a hypertrophy approach to a barbell back squat, I think is a really valuable way to learn a back squat for someone that doesn't have that skill, because then they're going to understand what they need to hold still and where they need to be able to move. And then once they are able to interpret and assess themselves, have some level of self-assessment around that, they're just going to be more effective at using their legs in a back squat or stabilizing their rib cage and core in a back squat.
Well, we saw that with the leg press that we did at Dragon Slayer.
Yeah.
So it's like I took him through a leg press, and typical strength athlete, and like nothing wrong with what you're doing, exactly as it is. As he hit the hole in the leg press, he just shoots out of it. It's like that's what you want.
Yeah.
That's exactly that's what you want as a strength athlete.
Yeah, it's like that's your entire world, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. But that's not what we want for hypertrophy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we want the speed of the movement to, yes, be fast and move, but the idea was like he actually lost tension on the muscle fibers when he hit the bottom and he shot out, versus like a little bit of a pause, held the contraction, and then it was a smooth, constant press or contraction out of it. It wasn't an explosive press. Now, you can argue that, yes, explosive plyometric does create hypertrophy 100%, but at that point, and what we're trying to do in a more stabilized medium, the goal there was to keep as much tension as we were talking about, keep the joints as still as possible to increase and ramp up that tension within that.
That's a beautiful example, and the way that I think of it is strength is efficiency at its finest.
Yeah.
Hypertrophy is inefficiency at its finest. We want to put you in as much disadvantage as you can, and we want to make it as hard to keep tension in that muscle as possible with as little weight as possible.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to see, to the point of hypertrophy training for strength, that its utilization here is, and we're using a good example here with the leg press, is as a lot of people tend to, I say like a lot of people as if I have some fucking clue what I'm talking about.
You have a better clue than most people, Matt.
Yeah, as if I train people. But I personally find for myself, and anecdotally, because I find it myself, I assume that everyone else does this, that the end ranges tend to be very neglected.
Yeah.
And I don't mean it from a perspective of, you have to spend time here, although that is helpful to achieve the goal. But to use the leg press as an example, when you get down to the bottom and you shoot out of it and go straight up, like I would be thinking or more concerned about the prospect of losing tension through a mechanism of my pelvis shifting. Because in that moment of reversal, I don't have very good control over my pelvis.
And that's likely what is happening from that perspective anyways, because that's what would happen in a barbell to a certain extent. Like you would have to shift out of that. Like we do need it to wrap, we do need it to come down. That's where like a hack squat works so well, when it doesn't have a pad that rides all the way down your ass. It's kind of just like
it's never a problem for me.
That's true.
Actually, but that's exactly it.
Yeah, well, that's the idea of structural versus functional stability, right? Is that in the bottom of back squat, you have the least structural stability afforded to you by your skeleton, so you need to be able to functionally create that with our functional tissue. I use the word function way too many times in that sentence, but really what I'm saying is musculature, right? The muscle, the tissues that we can control. Right, is we need to be able to understand how to control those muscles in that position, because we have a decreased ability to lean on the structure in that position.
Yeah. The one that I feel goes off the rails the most frequently is the shortened position of exercises, just because of this simple one thing. No, because if you think about it, that's where generally speaking, you're going to be most unstable at your end ranges, right? So to kind of use another example of this, lateral raises are a perfect example. If you're doing a lateral raise, if you do it on a machine, good for you. That's awesome. I like to do them on a machine. I have an Atlantis machine at the gym back in Hamilton that I use. That's a pretty good time. Problem is when I'm using this thing's not built for me, right? So I know that I have some
Nothing's built for you, Matthew.
But you know what? You just gotta lift the damn weights.
Exactly.
That's fucking right.
But yeah, the the key constraint of this is understanding where the end range kind of stops at the top for me, right? As I know what sort of disadvantages I'm working with, I know what I need to work through. When I start approaching my shortened range and I get up here, I notice sometimes that my scaps kind of come out. And whenever my scaps move in a way that doesn't sort of support the arm path of the lateral raise, then we're dealing with a deviation. Set's done. Mm-hmm. We're not really getting any more valuable tension on this. There's no point in us continuing this on.
Correct.
But that it's very easy to find yourself falling off the rails when you get to the end of a concentric phase. There's a lot of times, especially earlier on in the set when you feel fresh, people tend to sort of go as fast as they can to the end of the concentric, and then they go too far. Right? They go too far and they lose control. Something happens, right? Mm-hmm. It might not feel like much, but that stuff counts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think there's two aspects to that, though. One, understanding the medium. So it's like, for example, I personally, as much as I like the Atlantis, I'd never use it. and I'll give you.
I like this thing, but fuck this thing.
No, Atlantis makes a great variation of it. The problem is the feedback that I get from it is not my ability to self-correct in that movement straight away. A cable, I can't.
Right.
I can self-correct much faster. I get the straightest engaging. I can actually feel my scapula moving around the ribcage in a much more concise way to allow me to get to that fully shortened range and know that I'm kind of not going out of the range. The Atlantis is nice, but the handles dip down slightly. So what happens is your hands land up going slightly higher than what would be at the pivot point. So if you look at the machine, it actually means that the hands have to go higher than the position that we would for the fully shortened range of the delt.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's kind of where I'd look at it. So it's like looking at the machine, it's like I end higher than I would. Mm-hmm. So that would be my caveat. That again, you're a slightly different fucking human, but like that
is a very different human.
And just understanding that. But I agree with you. I think the fully shortened range is a position that not a lot of people control effectively. Mm-hmm. In saying that, though, I think that's why we suddenly saw a massive increase in glute hypertrophy, because when people started doing fucking glute bridges and hip thrusts and stuff, they focused a little bit more on finding that end range of the contraction, and they painted the edges of now not just doing mid-range or lengthened, and we saw the introduction of the shortened range of the glute coming through that we were loading. And I think that's where the explosion of the glute hypertrophy came up, because everyone went shortened and everyone then went, it's glute, it's hip thrusts, that's what it is, where it was just like, hey, we were able to find an end range of a shortened bridge, essentially, that we could load.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we taught you how to keep your pelvis from dumping forward.
Exactly.
And
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Then we could grow the muscle. It's got nothing to do with the fact that, like, the hip thrust is amazing.
Yeah.
Fucking
yeah. No, it has everything with the awareness. Everything
correct,
to do with the awareness around how to organize yourself in that position and create that stability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is what I consider to be kind of a hidden benefit to using machines for hypertrophy, in the sense of 100%. Training. I mean, hidden benefit to using machines for hypertrophy. Hypertrophy, spoken like a real idiot. But like as in for strength training, like using hypertrophic training methods for strength training is. And I'm going to use the lateral raise again because it's a great example. Like the stacked position of having a pelvis that's oriented to a rib cage properly is a very hot. Like it's of course the right thing to be doing, but it's also a very hot topic in socials right now. One of the things that I personally really love to build awareness around that position is a lateral raise. And the reason for that is the movement. In order for me to put sufficient tension on my delts, I have to have good control of my rib cage.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I want to make sure that I put my rib cage in a good position where I can get the good scapular articulation and all that good stuff. But I also want to make sure that that doesn't come at the cost of me flaring the rib cage out, right? Because the tension still needs to be here.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's a very low-risk environment, too.
Yeah, it's a good way to layer it in.
Yeah, there's no negative repercussions if you do it wrong. It's just you're not going to be effective in the movement.
Yep, and the forces of deviation, spoken as if it's like a fantasy novel, the forces of deviation. The forces of deviation are they're always present, and they're perceivable, but sometimes you can't perceive them because you have no awareness that they exist.
Yeah.
The rib cage swinging up is one. I mean, I'm again speaking from my own personal experience, so it must be like this for everyone. Is that like it was kind of hard to feel until I was in a position where I was able to build that awareness. So like lateral raises would have been one of the tools that I used amongst others. I'm sure there would, prone hamstring curls would be another good example, or even single leg standing. But the point of this was that after a while when I was doing these movements, I could start feeling as the load accumulated that I would want to start coming up and out of these positions. So I could start feeling the resistance that I need to pull against to keep the rib cage in that position, and that helps fortify awareness. Because when you take that position and you go on to a bench and you start doing a bench press or dumbbell press or something like that, now you know what that sensation feels like. Now you know what forces of deviation you're looking for. When you know what you're looking for, it's a lot easier to perceive them.
It's a familiar tactile cue is essentially what you created. You expose yourself to the tactile cue. It's like, okay, cool, this is the position that I'm supposed to be in to be adequate for the exercise that I'm doing. We've just done it in a much low risk. The benefit is there from a feeling perspective, if we were, but it's not the muscle that we're actually training, or it's the position that we're training at all.
Sure,
I like that. I really like that.
And we always get the side benefit of gains on the muscle that is moving, depending on what the movement is, right? So it's like, I mean, everyone loves to do lateral raises. I love lateral raises. Can I get some rib cage control out of that? That'd be pretty sick.
Fuck yeah. I think it's a really valuable technique for people to utilize. For people that might not have this level of understanding around movement too, is because if you feel it, you understand it, whether you understand it or not. Right? If that makes any sense. But once you feel that sensation, then now you can equate that for another movement pattern. It's that, remember that feeling we had in the lateral raises? We want to take that to our bench press, or we want to take that to our overhead press. Whatever that might be, is that you're kind of potentiating this position so that they now have some level of understanding of how to create this. And the terminology I always use is that we want to be stable here and move here.
Yeah.
Right? That's, as simple as that is, but that's what a lot of this stuff comes down to when we're not on something that's externally supported, is that if this is going to be our failure point, we want to be able to differentiate how we can create stability here, but actually still be able to move the scapula and move at the ball and socket joints. So that's a really, really cool way to start to introduce that to people that may not have that level of understanding around it.
And it's a great way to take the principle of hypertrophy and equate that and understand how that lays into strength.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. Is when we're talking about strength training, we're going to be concentrating entirely on generally barbell stacked required movements where you need to be in a position where you can produce a lot of force. You need to avoid deviations as much as you possibly can, and the best way to do that is to just organize yourself in a straight line.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention the hidden, again, I don't know how hidden it is, but the benefit of proprioception. Right? I think that's what this all kind of boils down to, is that what we're doing is we're taking very isolated movements and we're basically just teaching people that this is how I bend my elbow, or this is how I raise my arm. And then they can start to take those building blocks and build it into more complex movements over time. But if you just start and teach someone, here's a barbell on the floor, let's try and deadlift, they don't know how to organize every vertebra in their spine or create scapular depression or activate their lats. So I think hypertrophy is almost a building block. It's the buy-in at the foundation for strength training.
Yeah, and I don't want to downplay like the value of hypertrophy training, or like the complexity and the sort of like art that goes along with hypertrophy training. It's just like not to downplay and say it's like inferior to strength training or anything like that, but I do I personally believe that hypertrophic principles are primitive strength principles. Right? So the more that you learn how to keep the things that are supposed to stay still and make the things that are supposed to move, the better and stronger you are. The more force you can put out, the stronger you are.
Beautiful. Yeah. I don't know if we can explain it any better than that.
No.
That's what Matt does. He just takes complex things and he makes them sound really simple. And you're like, oh, why didn't I just think of that?
Now all you got to do now is just do the damn work.
Just fucking lift it.
That's it. You heard it here.
You heard it here.
Matt Penney. Anything to close on, guys?
Matt Penney.
Matt Penney.
Matt Penney.
It was fun, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.